All right, everyone. As you know, I've been playing Clair Obscur Expedition 33 on the PS5, and I've decided that we're all going to go on an expedition of our own.
The narrator never agreed to such a dangerous mission. Also, I'm the narrator.
Hey, you don't get to talk after that crap you pulled last week, David. Now, everyone, say hello to Esquier and Verso from Expedition 33.
Bonjour, mes amis. So many new rocks. I mean friends.
I knew it. You think everyone is a rock, don't you?
Don't be silly, Verso. You're far more handsome than any rock I've seen.
Careful, friend. Flattery will get you everywhere.
Come on, I don't have all day. I need to finish my Madness and Mayhem entry for today. I need to pump up my word count. Arnold's right, these skits usually don't run super long, so Esquier, what are we learning today?
Oh, I thought I was going to...
I'm so glad you asked, mon ami. Today, we will learn the art of parrying and dodging.
Precisely. The two could not be more different. You see...
Putain!
What the hell was that, Esquier?
You should have dodged, mon ami.
I was simply explaining the... Merde! Would you let me finish a sentence?
That time, you should have parried, mon ami.
Just practice amongst yourselves.
All right, Gollum, I'll pair up with you. Okay, here I go. I'm attacking.
We needs to dodge! No, we should parry. Dodge! Parry!
Ugh, we're not going to survive this expedition, are we, Esquier?
Qui sait, mon ami?
Well, before we head out, probably record this week's episode. Welcome, everyone, to the Saved Us Draft Podcast. Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 18 of the Saved Us Draft Podcast. I'm very excited for this week's episode as we've got another phenomenal interview for you all, but I'll save the surprise for later in the episode. First off, some housekeeping. I just launched the Madness and Mayhem Challenge this past week, and we're already on day 9. So many of you have already been participating in the challenge, and it makes me so happy to see you all getting inspired by this month's wild and unpredictable prompts. I've got plenty more tricks up my sleeve for the rest of the month, including some new prompts from the prompt goddess herself, so stay tuned. If you have yet to jump into the challenge, check out my subscriber chat each day for a thread that has details on that day's prompt. Feel free to go back to earlier prompts as well. There's no expiration on when you can do them, and don't forget to tag me when you post, so I can check it out, like, comment, and restack to support you. Alright, and with all that, let's get into this week's shoutouts. This week, I've got 5 fresh stories from the weekly podcast thread. Remember to check my subscriber chat every Tuesday for your chance to drop links to your latest work, and you can receive a shout out either here or on the Penny Dreadfuls podcast, and all links are randomly selected each week. And keep in mind that every week's shout out stories are also linked in the show notes, so you don't need to go far to check them out for yourself. Let's see what we got this week. First off is The Fence 2027 by 2D. This story is part of the Evolve series, which are standalone stories told purposefully out of order. They can be read alone, but together they form something greater, as the opening line states. Very intriguing. I like this concept a lot. The story immediately grounds you with a phenomenal sense of presence and atmosphere. The writing is elegant, but stops short of being too flowery. Even so, the descriptions and imagery are quite beautiful, and it moves at a good pace as well. It tells the story of a young boy playing baseball, and it doesn't go well. As someone who grew up being forced to try every sport there is because being a gamer wasn't considered socially acceptable back then, I really empathize with the struggle here in this first half of the story. However, in the second half of the story, the boy is alone and has the chance to experience an alternate scenario via a headset that seems to be some sort of VR device, if I had to guess. In this version of the game, he wasn't humiliated, but instead celebrated. I absolutely love this dichotomy, particularly how the writing voice shifted to a bold and confident style for the other side of the story here in the second half. Overall, this was wonderful, relatable, and beautifully written. It perfectly totes the line between prose and poetry with such grace. Check out this excerpt that I pulled from the story. Here, there was no fence, no clipboard, no misread intentions. Here, he mattered. Here, he was infinite. There's also a table of contents at the bottom of the story that seems to imply that the series spans thousands of years. I'm seriously blown away by how cool the structure is. You should really check it out and see what I'm talking about. Next up this week is The Exorcism of Mary Ann by Jared Michael Lambert. Okay, so right off the bat, this story does have some content warnings and is in fact based on true events, so please use discretion when deciding to read it. That being said, this was a white-knuckle roller coaster ride of a story. The pacing is pitch perfect, but it's the descriptions and imagery that really pulled me into the scene. The best stories make you feel like you're there, as they say, for better or worse, and this story pulled me right into all the gory details, in some cases literally. It plays out from a first-person perspective, as the protagonist watches a pastor rally churchgoers around the idea of exorcising a demon from a young girl. Things quickly take a dark turn, and it becomes clear that the only demons in this story are the churchgoers themselves. I won't go into further detail, but suffice to say, the story is incredibly well told and exquisitely written. It also contains some context at the end around the true events that inspired the story, and I was surprised to see that very little was embellished in the story itself compared to the true story. A lot of these based on true stories type tales typically add a lot to the original events for the sake of making things more exciting or scary. In this case, the author showed a lot of restraint, which is commendable, and it makes the story even more effective when you know the truth behind it. Check out this story excerpt. This will give you a good idea of the quality of writing on display. They closed in on her, tightening like a noose, their shadows drowning out her light. Dozens of oil-slicked fingers pressed against her, wriggling alien things grasping for purchase, leaving slug trails across her skin, yellowed nails catching and cutting into her skin. Yeah, it's scary stuff, and well worth a read if you don't mind those content warnings. Third this week is Henna Heart Episode 2, Freedom From, by Michelle Ray. It wasn't until I finished reading this one that I realized that the Henna Heart series here is in fact the title of Michelle's memoir. That detail made this story even more compelling than it already was. It also explained the exquisite amount of detail and realism in the writing here. The story begins in the Kingdom of Bahrain, as we follow a teacher who has arrived here after some time in Ecuador. As the story goes on, we learn about her time in Ecuador and what brought her to Bahrain. The pacing here is wonderfully done, but it also covers a lot of ground. We get an in-depth look at not only the city itself, but the way of life as well. The detail is astounding, with a perfect combination of context and commentary mixed in throughout. It's a very honest, very authentic, and towards the end, a very profound and introspective look at what it means to be human and the possibilities that come with a change in scenery. I really resonated with this one. Check out this excerpt. As we drove through Manama, he pointed out landmarks and dropped casual questions about my life. My thoughts formed and swirled, but words emerged like the shadowy figures we whizzed by in the night. When we finally pulled up to Rabia Towers, he helped me with my bags, smiled, and waved goodbye with a head bobble. I turned to my new home, a 6-story apartment facing a busy highway. I was on the 4th floor, with my bedroom window close to a mosque minaret. I learned later that mosques were on practically every street corner, like the neighborhood tiendas or corner shops in Ecuador, where I had last called home. I love how rich and detailed this one paragraph was, like sort of a montage of different thoughts, sights, sounds, and emotions. I'm a big fan of Michelle's writing, and you will be too when you check this out. And remember, find a link to all this week's shoutouts in the show notes. Fourth this week is The Director's Cut of Us by Joe Nichols. This was for Day 8 of the Madness and Mayhem Challenge, where I asked writers to choose the last line from someone else's work and use it as the first line of a new piece. In this case, Joe chose a line from Boo Pfeiffer that reads, "I thought I saw your shadow, even in the dark." A beautiful and haunting line in its own right. This is my first time reading Joe's work, but the first thing I noticed was how wonderful the writing voice comes through in this story. There's a ton of personality and a nice dash of humor that immediately endeared me to the narrator of the story. I felt like I was learning about them effortlessly as the story went on. Lines like, "What the hell does a ghost do with allergies?" is a hilarious example that makes more sense with context, of course. The story's told from the perspective of someone who's passed away, but still watches their partner go about their life and talk about them through rose-colored glasses. Despite this, every lie they tell seems to make our ghostly protagonist more corporeal. The way this story effortlessly gives the reader a full picture of the relationship that these two shared before the narrator passed is truly impressive. There are sprinklings of little details and references to the time they shared. It's used to correct the way the living partner misremembers the other person, so it fits perfectly in the story and doesn't feel like a distraction for the sake of world building or character development. Every line, every joke, every snide comment all serves the greater narrative. It's truly impressive craftsmanship from a narrative standpoint. It also makes the ending so much more impactful. I felt, truly, like I had known this couple the entire time they were together by the end. There's plenty of levity in this story, but beneath that there's a truly heart-wrenching tale about grief and what it means to look at the past through a nostalgic gaze. It's been a while since I've read something so funny and at the same time painfully profound. Here's an excerpt I really enjoyed. I think you're doing it because it works on other people. They sigh and nod when you say I was poetic. They tell you that you must have loved me very much. No one questions your details. No one says, are you sure he wasn't just kind of weird and obsessed with not touching door handles? You've imagined me like a Pinterest board. One part tragedy, one part charm, no clutter. Your version of me could be a minor character in a French film. The real me would have hated him. This piece really blew me away. And honestly, I'm honored that it came about as a response to a prompt in my challenge for this month. Bravo, Joe. I'm very, very impressed. Our final shout out this week is The Softest Thing to Break by TP Chaos. It has been far, far too long since I talked about a chaos tale on the podcast here, so I'm eager to dive into this one. And once again, chaos has made magic. I first discovered Chaos through the Devine Challenge, where they wrote an absolutely incredible story about the fate of the Magiri in my fictional fantasy realm. I was immediately hooked by the way the writing danced across incredible imagery, but simultaneously moved at a steady pace and evoked a ton of emotion. Chaos has a style that cannot be imitated or matched. I always say that we should strive as writers to develop a unique writing voice, and Chaos is a perfect example of why. Their writing is iconic, and introspective pieces like this manage to perfectly encapsulate the most concentrated form of any given emotion or concept. In this piece, we're talking about the kind of person who gives and gives and gives, never realizing that they are slowly destroying themselves in the pursuit of making others happy. In the moment, you think it's a noble pursuit. You tell yourself that one day it'll be reciprocated. You just have to keep giving so they can see how much they mean to you. And you do this, but as Chaos so eloquently describes, people will take and take until there's nothing left. And then, when you need help, they'll turn a blind eye. The piece is structured as a message, to whom I won't say, but I promise it'll leave you breathless by the time you reach the end. If you're like me, and you recognize a lot of what I just described, I highly recommend you read this piece. It's beautiful, cathartic, honest, and a perfect example of how prose can be just as artistically enrapturing as any painting hanging in a museum when it's done like this. Here's an excerpt that I really enjoyed. They drink from you like you are a well that will never run dry. They take from you like they have never known something so sweet. And you, oh my love, you thank them for the ruin. You convince yourself the emptiness is just another way to hold them closer. Chaos is a true gem in this community, but their writing alone is something that everyone should experience, because we can all learn something from it, whether that's the incredible way it's constructed or the carefully composed message that it contains. And that's it for this week's shoutouts. I have to say, these are some of the best stories I've featured on the show so far. Every week, I'm just completely blown away by the sheer talent that exists in this community. You are all so inspiring. Thank you as always for giving me the chance to talk about your work. All right, and next up this week is our weekly writing discussion topic, which this week I'm going to be talking about setting goals for your work. As someone who posts once a day and produces a podcast also once a week, among many other things, I'm probably the last person who should be talking about setting realistic goals, but I think I can offer some wisdom here. At the very least, I can tell you how to avoid the dreaded burnout that comes with setting insane goals and then beating yourself up when you don't meet them. Ambition and excitement are easy to find when you're surrounded by amazing people like the ones in this community, but it's easy to find yourself underwater without an air tank if you try to spread yourself too thin. Ask me how I know. So, this week, I'd like to take a few minutes to talk about what it means to set realistic goals. As writers, we often measure our success based on word count, so it's a good place to start. A lot of people, myself included, probably have a number of projects you're working on, so an easy way to set a goal is to try and write a certain number of words per day. That works well in theory, but it also assumes that you're going to feel like writing that amount of words every day. We often forget that we're people, which means we have good and bad days. For this reason, I don't like to recommend setting a hard word count goal unless you need to. Instead, my approach is a combination of word count and time-specific goals. As many of you know, I try to publish on Substack once per day, and this can be tough because oftentimes I need to make something new from scratch. I do have about 4 years of short stories that I've written in the past, and I'll sometimes pull one of those out to polish it up, but in many cases I also want to make improvements to the piece and record narration, which both take their own amount of time. I guess what I'm trying to say here is that there's no one-size-fits-all solution, so you kind of need to figure out what works best for you and your situation. And that's lesson number 1 here. Don't try to force yourself to hit someone else's goals. Lesson 2 is to set goals that are flexible. As I hinted at earlier in the discussion, don't say you're going to write 2,000 words every day no matter what. There's going to be days where you can't do that, and that's okay. You need to set a range, maybe between 500 and 2K words a day for example. Lesson 3 is to make sure your goals can be hit consistently. If you set goals that you're only occasionally able to hit, you're going to quickly find yourself running out of steam and morale pretty quickly, because you're going to focus on the lack of success instead of the times when you did manage to hit the goal. So do me a favor and don't fall into that trap of setting a goal that works only some of the time. Choose something that's repeatable and something you can hit consistently. Lesson number 4 is to find balance between your goals and your free time. Burnout is real, people, and as someone who has felt it numerous times in my life, you need to be careful about taking on more than you can handle, whether that's self-imposed pressure to hit your goals or because you got excited about collaborating and started one too many projects. I work in marketing at my day job, but I also run the Writer's Journey here on Substack, as well as this podcast that you're listening to right now. It's a lot, I'll be honest, but I love what I do, and I love this community. That being said, I've been finding ways to balance all of this with my free time, because I can't forego time for myself no matter how much I'd like to. I need to rest and recharge, like everyone else. And I have a beautiful and supportive partner who wants to spend time with me as well. Writing defines a huge part of me, and it's always going to be a huge part of who I am, but it can't take up all my free time outside of work. That being said, it can have most of it. So you just need to see what works for you, because here's the thing. There's always going to be more things to do than you have time for. You're never going to have enough time for everything. Which brings me to my final lesson. Lesson number 5 is to prioritize. You'll need to leave certain things for another day, and that's okay. Try rotating the stuff you do work on each day if need be. It can keep you on your toes, and if you manage to work a little bit on a lot of things, all that progress will add up. Alternatively, you can focus primarily on a project you really want to get done, but leave a little wiggle room to check out some other posts on Substack or post a few notes to engage with the community. It doesn't have to be an even split. And that's all I've got for now. But let me know if you'd like to take a deeper dive into this on a future article in the Writer's Journey. We can discuss tips and tools for how to stay organized and manage your time, for example. Now, without further delay though, let's get to this week's interview. This week, I'm incredibly excited to share a recent interview I recorded with a fellow horror writer that I met very early on in my Substack journey. I still recall the first story of hers that I ever read. The title escapes me, but it was about a doll who had witnessed the end of the world due to climate change and the hubris of humanity. I had rarely encountered eco-fiction the way that she wrote it, and I was immediately hooked. I reached out to ask her if she wanted to collaborate on an eco-fiction focused poetry collection shortly thereafter, and that's a project that we're still working on together to this day. It was the beginning of an amazing friendship, though, and she was consistently a participant in my Flash Fiction February challenge as well, where she wrote some truly stunning stories, including an entry into my Devine challenge that brought fairies to the realm for the first time. She's also recently launched a podcast of her own that's been growing incredibly fast and is doing some really cool stuff with the community. All of that in just the last few months, and I have a feeling that she's just getting started. So now that I've sufficiently hyped her up, let's dive into this week's interview. All right, everyone, and I am incredibly excited to welcome to the show a fellow horror writer, eco-fiction author, and host of the Penny Dreadfuls podcast, the one, the only, Mina Howell. Mina, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Bradley. I'm super excited to get started.
So let's start off with just kind of a question I ask everybody. Tell us a little bit about yourself and your creative journey thus far.
Like most authors that have been featured on the podcast, I, as a child, looked for escapes in basically everything. So I was into video games, which I still am, books, photography, and I played cello for like 12 years. So those are like high things on my list. But I think that the thing that helps me the most is writing. And especially here on Substack, I haven't really ever felt like I have fit in anywhere, but the community here has been so welcoming, and I'm just so grateful for everyone that I've met on here.
Absolutely, I couldn't agree more. It's funny that you have played cello in the past. The first instrument I played was violin myself.
Oh my gosh, I played violin for 6 months, but the E string hurt my fingers so bad. So I switched to cello because the strings are bigger.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Nice, nice. No, yeah, but I definitely also resonate with, kind of like struggling to find a place in a community. I definitely wanted to shout that out as well because that's something that I noticed pretty early on Substack and something that I'm continuously grateful for.
Yeah, it's just so amazing. And I feel like everything I put out is just like getting the perfect person to resonate with it. And that's really what I wanted out of, or to get out of my writing.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And I have to also, number three, shout out the gaming aspect because I myself am someone who is absolutely inspired by gaming. Are there any titles that come to mind? I don't want to put you on the spot, but are there any titles that come to mind as kind of, not necessarily your all-time favorite, but just particular titles over the years that may have inspired some of your stories?
Well, right now, actually, I am playing Resident Evil Village, and that's kind of inspiring the Ophiocordyceps story, like a little bit.
Hmm.
We can get more into that later, but and I don't know, like I find myself going back to play Catherine a lot.
Yeah.
I like that there's like 13 endings, and I mean, it really, they all just have such a range of where the story goes, that it kind of makes me think about different ranges where my stories could go as well.
Interesting, interesting. Catherine is a really cool one to call out. I remember playing that when it first came out, and yeah, to this day, it is still pretty unique. I can't think of many others like it.
Right?
Um, yeah, yeah. So that's a good one. That's a good one. So when did you kind of first realize that you wanted to be a writer?
I don't know that there was ever like a specific light bulb moment. I used to read a lot as a kid, and I actually started writing fantasy in like fifth grade. Um, I remember vividly there was this tree at my elementary school, and I would sit under it and just like scribble, scribble, scribble in my journal. It was a story about dragons, but I don't remember anything else that was going on in it. But flash forwarding to now, I find that, if I don't write, I don't feel like myself anymore. Um, so I just feel like my soul is kind of called to writing, and yeah, hopefully, I'll sell some books in the future, but for right now, I just really like to get those thoughts out and be able to breathe if it were, or as it were.
That makes total sense. I definitely resonate with that as well. I feel most like myself when I'm writing. So that's yeah, couldn't agree more with that. So these days, a lot of what you publish on Substack, I would classify as like horror, and then you have some really cool stuff that you do with eco-fiction. So my question for you is, what drew you to those genres? And since you mentioned fantasy, is that something you've thought about delving back into at any point in the future as well?
Okay, so I'll start with fantasy because it's a quick answer. I don't know. I really enjoyed the Devine challenge that you did in Flash Fiction February, and so that was a really cool way to get my fantasy out a little bit. But I don't know. I think I'm happy in the horror and eco fiction for right now. That may change though.
Okay,
And
that makes sense. Yeah.
yeah.
For those who may not be aware, could you give us kind of a quick overview of eco-fiction as a genre from your perspective? Like, what are the elements that kind of define those types of stories for you?
Well, for me personally, and this is also what drew me to start writing eco-fiction. I've been working in wildlife research and like in parks for a little while, and Some of the things that I have seen are absolutely insane. Just the way that people treat the earth, and like when I was doing wildlife research, the way that human structures or human behaviors are affecting any species, but specifically we were working on freshwater mussels. So just seeing how much things change because of human interaction really disappoints me, one. But two, I don't personally think that I can do much to help it, which I hate to admit. But so the reason I write eco fiction is kind of my way of doing something to help. So basically, I just hope that, people can see what I'm laying out in the story, and if it resonates with them, maybe they can change how they interact with the earth. And it's kind of my way of helping the earth fight back, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Absolutely. So when you're kind of like, looking for inspiration, I know we talked about gaming, which is a huge source of inspiration for me as well. Um, where do you often kind of find yourself, getting the most inspiration from? Is it obviously you mentioned working in like wildlife and stuff like that, so I have to imagine that's part of it as well. But like for kind of the other writers and readers out there who are curious, what are kind of like your top sources of inspiration whenever you're trying to come up with something new?
That is honestly so hard to say. I kind of like to describe my writing as musings from behind the veil, but they just come randomly. So my Ophiocordyceps story, that was inspired by this insane fog that I drove through on my way to work. So I have this like 45-minute drive to get to the park, and I couldn't even see the trees in front of me or the cars because the fog was so thick. And I was driving, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, what if I wrote a story about a fog that brings in the zombie ant fungus? And then it all kind of like fell into place from there. Um, but other than that, it's like songs, video games, and especially other authors, but a lot of it is nature based.
Absolutely. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. So, this is something I ask all the authors that come onto the show here. I'm curious, how did you specifically first find out about Substack? And I'd be curious to know, like, obviously you've made a ton of progress so far, and we'll get into some of your other projects as well here. But what are your kind of long-term goals, as an author on Substack?
Okay, so how I found out about Substack is actually a little embarrassing, but it's fine. So I have had a maybe a slightly unhealthy obsession with Chuck Palahniuk's books. And at one point, he was tired of editors like gouging his stories and started publishing an entire book on Substack. And so I actually started my Substack like years ago. But I actually only started doing anything with it this year, at the beginning of the year. And honestly, the growth I've had is crazy. And I'm so glad that I started. Mostly for long-term goals, I would like to, continue to grow my audience, but also catch up on all the projects that I've been working on. There are quite a few of them, and it's a little daunting, but I'm gonna do my best to work on those more. And I would also love to have the books that I publish reach a wider audience as well.
Absolutely, that makes complete sense. That's very interesting that you've been on Substack for so long. It's just, obviously I joined in January, and you and I met, I think, relatively close to when I joined. And yeah, as you said, your growth has been amazing to see. Like just the way that I've seen your stories kind of proliferate, across the
Yeah.
community, is really cool. And to that point, my next question here, I wanted to talk about your podcast that you recently launched, called the Penny Dreadfuls podcast. And that show has already evolved and kind of expanded in several ways over the last few weeks, especially. So my question is, what inspired the show, and can you talk a little bit about like kind of how it's evolved and where it's going?
Yeah, I so I was actually inspired by your podcast. I'm usually in my, regular life, I'm not too much of a talker, so I didn't know if I could actually do it. But you had put out an article. I cannot remember what it was called, but it was about like growing your audience, or something like that. And one of the things that you suggested was a podcast, and I felt really called to do it. So I just put out one episode. I was like, whatever happens with it happens. It's going to be totally fine. And one, I found that I was having a lot of fun doing it, which is mainly what I'm going for, but also that people were really enjoying it. Um, so that was so phenomenal that something I just happened to try is actually doing really well. Um, as for how it's evolving, I have a new segment that is going to start tomorrow. So tomorrow will be the first day, and it is going to be where I play recordings of other authors reading their stories. So instead of, I mean, I'm still going to do the reviews, but instead of just having reviews, I want to highlight other authors reading their actual stories. So I wanted to do that for a couple of reasons, but one is that Penny Dreadfuls were historically little stories, back in the day, that were available for like a penny, and that's what the podcast is named after. So I wanted to do something in homage of that. But I also thought that it would be a really great way to showcase the work of others. Again, aside from the story reviews that I do.
That's really cool. I'm extremely excited to check that out. Yeah, I mean that's bringing in other authors to read their stories is really an interesting angle that I haven't seen very often. Obviously, I've seen like podcasts where people kind of narrate stories of their own and stuff, but I love that you're kind of involving the community. And I love that you also mentioned the definition of the penny dreadfuls because I've heard that before, but it's been a while, so that was nice to kind of put two and two together there. I like that a lot.
Thank you. I'm really excited for it to go live. The the submission post is in my subscriber chat, but also I'm just going to kind of open it up after tomorrow so anyone can just send me a message and I'll just send them to the link. That way, so it's not so restrictive as to just being my subscribers.
That makes a lot of sense. I think that's a great idea to kind of open it up to a wider audience.
Yeah.
I'll have to take a look as well because that sounds really cool.
I think it's cool. I'm really excited.
On that, we can agree.
Yes.
So, as a follow-up to that, then, now that you've had some practice with your podcast, I'm curious, have you put any thought into kind of, because obviously I know you've always been a big fan and a really awesome supporter of the narration that I do on my stories. So I'm curious, now that you've kind of dipped your toes into the audio realm with your podcast, can readers expect in the future for you to potentially narrate some of your own stories as well?
Potentially in the future. I That's another hurdle I'm gonna have to jump, but I definitely could see myself doing it. But I don't think it'll be, within the next couple months or anything.
For sure. That makes sense. It's one of those things where you really have to kind of like I myself had to teach myself a ton of things over the course of many hours to
Yeah.
figure out how it all works and everything. So it is certainly something you have to kind of set aside time for. But in the meantime, the podcast is doing great. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
So another thing that you've been doing with the community that I've noticed and also really enjoyed participating in is you did the Acrostic April challenge that you had hosted. So I'm curious, now that April's over with, how did that go in terms of engagement and stuff? And do you see yourself doing more challenges like that in the future?
So it was honestly a little bit slow, but to me, I think that made it even more special. So the stories that were submitted for it were so breathtaking, and I feel like I got to know the few people that participated even better. And so I think it's kind of like a quality over quantity kind of situation, and I'm so honestly glad that it went that way. Um, in the future, I would like to do a more in-depth writing challenge, but I'm not exactly sure when I'll be doing that yet. I think being able to like collaborate with another author on one would be amazing, and honestly, that's such a dream. But again, that's another project for another time.
Well, I think that's a phenomenal idea, but yeah, definitely. I participated in a few of the Acrostic April prompts that you did, and I did notice how kind of um how it brought like new writers into the fold, and how it, like you said, gave you an opportunity to like meet people and experience like very authentic work of theirs because of these prompts and what they kind of drew to the surface. So that was really cool. And I myself had actually never written an acrostic poem, I don't think,
Really?
before your challenge. So that was just a really cool experience for me.
Oh my gosh, that's so awesome. I was telling my fiance about it. He's like, "What even is an acrostic?" I was like, "Oh my God. Okay, listen." So it was a fun little thing, and it was honestly kind of hard. Like even though I wrote the prompts, most of them at least, it was difficult. And so I'm glad that the people that did participate participated, and I'm glad that we all got to grow in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. I could not agree more. So, wanted to kind of check in on progress with your kind of your current projects and priorities. I know we talked a little bit here and there already about your Cordyceps series.
Mhm.
So, what's going on with that? Like, how far are you into it? What are the plans for it? And are there any other projects that you can kind of maybe give our listeners a little bit of a teaser for coming down the road?
Okay, so I don't know how far the Ophiocordyceps story will go. I've got part three coming out tomorrow. Still have to write it, but we are going to see the introduction of a new character, and this part is going to be focusing on the aftermath of the fog. So it rolled into town in the last part. We saw what it did firsthand, but I want to show what goes on after everything has happened, essentially. And that's when we'll meet the new character that's going to play a really, really big role in it. I've got a few ideas for the ending, but again, I just kind of let the story take me where it wants to go. Um, as in terms of other projects, I have been toying around with the idea of another book. I definitely have two that are collecting digital dust right now, but I'm really excited about this other one, so I'm kind of going to work on that instead. It is essentially based on the park that I work in. So the park that I work in has a lot of really beautiful formations that are called hoodoos, and you should look it up if you get a chance because they're so beautiful.
Hmm.
And in some cultures, they're believed to be the remains of ancient beings that had been sanctioned for any sort of misdeed. So the book's going to kind of surround that idea. And it's probably going to be from the perspective of a park ranger, but the reader will have to decide for themselves if the events are actually taking place or if it's all in the park ranger's mind.
Wow, that sounds so good. Wow.
And
Mm,
literally, like, this whole thing came to me because I was working on a program, and it just all kind of fell into my mind.
wow. I'm definitely gonna have to look that up. Yeah, that sounds amazing. I can see how that would have inspired the story that you're working on. I can
Yeah.
connect those dots very easily. Yeah. That
So
is
I'm
cool.
really excited about that one.
That is cool. Well, I will be first in line to check that one out. That sounds amazing.
Thank you.
Very cool. Very cool. So, this is the last question that I have for you here today. But I wanted to, since we've talked about your journey, thus far on Substack and as a writer, I'm wondering, as you look back, are there any kind of things that you wish you had known earlier, or advice or lessons that you would like to kind of impart to your fellow writers who are maybe just starting out?
Yeah. So honestly, I think writing for yourself is the absolute most important thing. Um, Especially for me, like being able to get all of the things that I'm trying to process out on paper. If it's meant to be, your audience is going to find you, and at least then you'll know that they're following you for real reasons and because they really resonate with your work. Um, I did hear a piece of advice from another author, and I kind of only half agree with it. It's something along the lines of like, no one wants to read about what the horrible things are that are going on in your life, but they will if it's framed in a new way. And like, I can definitely see how that would be true for a lot of the world, but things like autobiographies and stuff like that are insanely popular, and a lot of people may feel alone in the things that they're going through. So I think it's really important to be able to show those things like raw and unadulterated, and if they resonate, they resonate. If they don't, they don't.
No, I completely agree with you there. Especially in the sense that, like, as human beings, there's definitely sort of shared experiences that we all, across the entire globe of people, there are lots of kind of parallel experiences, and it really is important, I think, for writing to kind of open up those sort of, quantum level connections where you don't know this person, you've never met them, like you're on completely different paths, but yet you can still find this common ground and feel sort of less alone, which I think is
Right.
just really important. So I appreciate you calling that out. It's a good point.
Yeah, and I think that that's what people are looking for when it comes down to it. Like, they don't want it goes back to the quality versus quantity thing. If you have 1,000 friends that don't have anything in common with you, or you can't talk to them on anything but a surface level, that's not going to be fulfilling to you. So I think having a few friends or a few followers that really understand what you're saying and agree with you and also feel the same way is much more important.
Yeah, I could not agree more. I could not agree more. Well, thank you so much for coming on to the show, Mina. I think I speak for everyone listening when I say that we are extremely excited for this, new era of your podcast with that new segment, and I, for one, am extremely excited for the next chapter of the Cordyceps series, and of course that other project that you mentioned just a little bit earlier in the interview here. So thank you so much for coming on. This was an amazing conversation, very insightful, and yeah, really, really appreciate your time.
Thank you so much for having me. I had a blast.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
All right, and thank you again to Mina for coming on to the show. I'm really excited for some of her upcoming projects, and if you haven't checked out her ongoing Ophiocordyceps series, I'd highly recommend you catch up. All right, and next up today is Thoughts from the Void with Voidy.
I can attest, Sir Voidy's the best. He wouldn't dare play it close to the vest. He's here to share, from here and to there, the writers and words of which he does care.
Hey there, Voidy. Do you have your pitch ready for your book from last week? No! I was so excited about the interview with Mina Howell that I spent this whole week catching up on her stories. Oh, well, that's all right. What did you think? Well, for starters, I discovered that cuttlefish can have nightmares, so that was fun. Yeah, Mina's horror stories can really have an impact. I also need to know if the fog in her new series can infect cuttlefish. Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. You'll have to ask her. I'm not sure. That's not good enough! I need to make sure my family and I are protected! So wait, since when do you have a family? Since forever! My beautiful cuttlefish partner Clarissa and I have over 400 children! Wow. Okay then. Well, congratulations. I'm happy for you. Thanks. I've got photos of them in my wallet here. Want to see? You have photos of all 400 of them? Yeah. You better get comfortable. This is going to take a while. Ha ha, great. Well, now that Voidy's finished introducing me to all 400 of his kids, we can talk about what's coming up next week on Substack. The big focus next week is going to be our ongoing Madness and Mayhem Challenge, which has been going insanely well so far. Remember to check my subscriber chat each day for the latest prompt and challenge. I've got plenty more surprises in store to keep you on your toes this month. I'm also hoping to wrap up the Echoes from the Abyss series in the coming week or two. Chapter 3's poll closed, so I'm ready to continue the story with Chapter 4, and I think Chapter 5 will probably be the conclusion. That series has been really fun to write, since readers are voting at the end of each chapter on what comes next. Make sure to cast your vote when Chapter 4 releases in the coming days. So as much as I would like to get the next Devine prelude out, I'll have to take my own advice and set some realistic goals here. Rest assured though, we will continue to make progress toward the launch of the series set in my fantasy and sci-fi realm very soon. Next week, I'm also excited to welcome to the show another horror author and podcaster by the name of A.R. Eldridge. We had a great conversation the other day, and I really appreciated him working with me to find a good time to record the interview, since our time zones are 14 hours apart. And speaking of interviews, I'm looking forward to having more guests on the show. Writers, artists, and creatives of all kinds are welcome. Feel free to send me an email or DM me here on Substack if you're interested. If you prefer email, you can reach me at authorbradleyramsey@gmail.com. In the meantime, I appreciate all your support, as always, and I want to shout out a huge thank you to everyone participating in this month's Madness and Mayhem Challenge. I've been loving your work so far. I hope you all have a productive and safe week full of amazing writing, and this is Bradley Ramsey, signing off.
Dodge! Parry! Dodge! Parry! Dodge! Bonjour, mon ami. You're doing so well. I'm very proud of you. I wanted to show you this new rock I found. It's very shiny. It reminds us of the precious. Oh? What's the precious, mon ami? You better sit down. This is going to take a while to catch you up.